Before this video gets started, I want to let you all know that this week, I am bringing to you Cinco de Muero, which means starting May 1st, I'm going to bring you 5 straight days of horror, not just here, but also 5 straight days of horror on Patreon. So if you would like to promote the horror community by helping to be part of the creation of a site that will celebrate horror and allow it to be free from censorship, I urge you to go to HorrorTube's Patreon and come see what it's all about. And now, onto the video. The Graveyard Shift. Many might prefer working alone at night and into the wee hours of the morning by themselves. Not too bad. Unless, of course, you actually work the graveyard shift at a graveyard. And things start to get weird. Here are 15 people telling us about the weirdest things they found while working at a graveyard. Enjoy. My best friend and I worked at a cemetery as groundskeepers as juniors and seniors in high school. It was easy money. $5 an hour in the late 70s, mostly for edging, trimming, and keeping the graves tidy. We tore around that place in a souped-up golf cart with our tools and back. It was annoying to work in the rain, and it rained often, but it was truly a gravy job. No pun. There were a lot of dead flowers to remove, along with numerous empty liquor bottles and used condoms. There was a widow who left scribbled notes torn from a reporter's notebook upon her husband's grave, all completely illegible. On the graves of children, a lot of sodden stuffed animals that were sometimes mysteriously muddy. The creepiest thing I saw was a plastic drink cup and a wet baby doll, nails stuck in its head and burnt, as if someone went over it lightly with a blowtorch. I kept the head and hung it from my rearview mirror like a graduation tassel. But the worst thing I saw was the naked corpse of a young woman my age, a student at a neighboring high school, left neatly with her arms at her sides one foggy Saturday morning. She had been strangled right there, and her killer also punched her in the face several times before she was dead. Though she was identified quickly, her clothes were never found, and her murder never solved. My friend and I got grilled by the police over several sessions, but we didn't know anything. My friend quit a couple weeks later, but I hung on until I turned 18 when I was eligible to work in my uncle's printing plant. I'll never forget the bruises and her open, dead, blue eyes. A relative of mine who worked in a cemetery told me this story. The cemetery, a few hundred years old, and the church next to it existed before the 16th century. Considering the fact it is a remote place as well, most people back in the day were buried with wooden crosses and such. As time goes on, crosses rot away, new people get buried, etc. Nowadays, due to less people living in the countryside, that cemetery is pretty much growing over, a sad sight for such a pretty place. Anyway, someone was taking care of their relative's grave and decided to expand the area around the grave. This person removed the grass and tidied up the place with a rake. When they raked up white hair from the ground, they freaked out and left, leaving my relative, the cemetery attendant, to find this hair coming out of the ground. She reported it to the church and supposedly they reburied the body. Not even sure how there could have been a body so close to the surface. For years in my hometown, there's been a fetus in a jar left at a gravesite. Or so we've been told. It's been there since I was a kid. I should also say that if it is a fetus, it no longer looks like one. We've been told for years it is one, so the townspeople don't touch it. Mine is super short, but once I saw a live chicken shackled to a headstone. Everyone thought it was something to do with a curse or a sacrifice, but no explanation was ever offered up. I worked at a cemetery one summer as a groundskeeper. One thing I saw that seemed strange at first was an open flipped cell phone. Upon closer inspection of the tombstone, I realized it belonged to the deceased, who was in her late teens or early 20s when she passed away. A very sad reminder to me that even though I was around her age when she passed, I'm not invincible. Sometimes people forget that, especially when they're younger. I've never worked at a cemetery, but I once tagged along with a friend who did a while back. He and I were walking around the whole site when we spotted something pink and feathery hanging off of one of the statues situated above a grave. As we walk over, we see it's a pair of fuzzy pink handcuffs with matching panties, just dangling off a statue. We both had a good laugh, but still never knew why someone chose to display those items on a loved one's public grave. We figured it was just their way of showing their respect, or someone was having raunchy cemetery sex in the dead of night. My best friend's father works as a groundskeeper for a cemetery. He told us once that he saw a little kid leave a blanket on someone's grave, presumably his father's. The mother and the child were alone. He heard the child say, "He might be cold." I'm not a cemetery worker, but I once found candles and glass beads in a circle around my father's and a couple of other people's graves. I had no idea if they stood for some sort of ritual, but I quickly disposed of them. I worked as a groundskeeper over the spring and summer for my father-in-law, a gravedigger his entire life. Most of it usually just balloons and fake flowers. I hate fake flowers. I saw toys, unopened bottles, spare change, packs of unopened MTG cards, cigarettes, etc. One person even had a golf ball and a golf tee hid under 3 inches of weeds that I hit with my weed eater. That was nice. On the grave of a cat lady, who was buried with one of her cats, there was a food dish left by her family, who would fill it for weeks after. Wildlife is already a big problem in cemeteries, and now someone was feeding them. I worked at a neighboring cemetery helping my grandfather cut the grass. Went for walks there because it was close to my house. During one stroll, I stumbled across someone who was murdered and dumped into the bushes. I have no idea whatever came of it. I was honestly too traumatized to find out. I worked at a Jewish cemetery during university, so it was common for people to leave things on graves. By far the weirdest was after someone came and ate McDonald's at a grave, they left a breakfast sandwich on the gravestone. I guess maybe in a way, McDonald's brings everyone together. Golden Arches pun. I was active in paranormal investigations and ghost hunting. Did a lot of walkthroughs of cemeteries. One gravesite in particular had a bunch of trinkets on it, a handful of those glass beads people use in decorating, and a whole bunch of small toys that resembled a Happy Meal prize. I remember there being some sort of Wizard of Oz toy in there too, figure of Mulan, a few others. There was also a small ring of stones, no marker, nothing, with a couple of tennis balls inside it. I later learned that in the past, it was tradition that the first body to be buried in the ground dedicated as a cemetery, be it dog or some other animal, to keep guard, while human souls transcended to their destination. My family and I used to volunteer at a cemetery, helping take care of the graves, edging the stones, and whatnot. A recently buried man had owned a hobby shop, and his family put a train set around his tombstone. Each train compartment held a little token or something he liked. There was a handheld poker game, a scratch-off ticket, a beer can, a deck of cards, and some other random trinkets. I thought it was a nice gesture, and it was kind of funny watching the train going in circles with all of these little pieces in the graveyard. One of our company's maintenance contracts was an old cemetery. Though I only went there a couple of times, one aspect of it did stick out to me. A plain granite brick, out of line with any other headstone or footstone. It had fallen out of a wheelbarrow while a retaining wall was being built, and no one touched it. For decades, everyone passed this brick by, thinking it went with a grave, and so it slowly buried itself into the earth. I sure as hell wasn't moving it. Now, though this isn't at a cemetery, Gregory Pacheco's monument on Palomar Mountain outside San Diego has several unopened beer cans, numerous keys, house and car, unopened junk mail, Hot Wheels, sunglasses, flatware, a handicapped parking pass, also not the descendants, a miniature sewing machine, pliers, a set of andirons, and a trove of other miscellaneous objects. Well, what about you? Could you work at a graveyard? Would you be comfortable surrounded by death and decay? Or would you mistake every sight and sound for a scene in a horror movie and run for your life? Personally, I think I might be bored to death. See you next time.